Hello, my name is Carol Fulmer, and I work with Interlocal Solid Waste Authority. And I would like to talk with you today about backyard composting. What is compost? Compost is a nutrient-rich soil that many of us buy every year to grow vegetable and flower gardens. Compost uses things that we throw away daily to make this real, rich, valuable soil. Compost helps with water retention, erosion control, and disease control. And it also can help decrease our use of fossil fuels. So, how do you compost? Well, compost happens. There's really not anything you can do to keep it from happening. But there are things that you can do to make it happen more quickly. And that's what we'll talk about today. And some of the things that you can put into your composter. Now, as far as a bin, you really don't have to have a bin. If you live out and to where you don't have neighbors that may complain, you can just pile up your leaves and composted items in a big pile and just let them rot if you're not in a hurry to have compost. So one day it will become compost. But you can also use pallets and make different bays to put your backyard compost in. Or if you have some old fence wire, you can shape it in a cylinder and make your own compost bin. Or you can use some more commercial composter like the Earth Machine backyard composter that we will use today. So a compost pile needs to be about 4 by 4 by 4. That's the optimal size. It can be any size. And you add different materials to it. Now when I'm going to start a Earth Machine composter for the first time, I like to put twigs in the bottom. And that way I crisscross them and it keeps the rest of my material a little off the ground, and it allows the air to flow through, which is called aerate, and we'll talk a little more about that. Now I also like to use a bigger stick. You can use like an old broom handle. This one is a little too tall though. You would want to cut it off. You don't want it sticking out so that the lid won't go onto your composter. So I cut one or broke one off, and I just stick it down in the middle of my pile. Like I said, you may want to put your twigs in there. Try to twist it down into the dirt a little bit. And we'll talk about what we're going to use it for a little later. Now, the first thing, or the most important thing that you need to do is just get started. Because again, compost happens. So you gather your items, your browns and your greens. Your browns are your carbons and your greens are your nitrogens. And, they say that, you layer them and there's a certain ratio. I like to say let's use Mother Nature's ratio, because if things fall down in the woods, they'll eventually turn into compost. But if you want compost more quickly, then it's about a 30-to-1 ratio, 2/3 to 1/3 carbon to nitrogen. And my rule of thumb is if an item was grown in the dirt or made from something grown in the dirt, then it will turn back into dirt. So let's start with our browns and an easy one, dried leaves, okay? So, you gather up your leaves, you put them in your composter. You can use green grass. Again, you know that layering your materials, browns and greens, is a really good thing. So, you know, you put your greens in. I have some green grass, some green moss, you know, that I put in. All right, you can use paper. Paper towels is something good because it's not a kind of paper that you want to recycle, because we usually use paper towels to clean up nasty messes. And the guys at the recycling center don't want to have to handle a paper towel that you've blown your nose on. All right, so you know, you can put your paper towels in there. Now, surface area. The more surface area, or the more you shred it, the smaller your pieces are, the faster it will compost. So I'm going to rip these up just a little. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So if you're not really good at keeping houseplants alive, you can compost your dead houseplant that you forgot to water, or you left outside after the frost. Okay, and again, the smaller you make it, the faster it'll compost, but you can put it in whole. It'll compost eventually. All right, so food scraps out of your kitchen. You can compost things like any kind of vegetable scrap. Again, if it was grown in the dirt or made from something grown in the dirt, it'll turn back into dirt. And I like to have something that has a lid on it, like this container, or, you know, so a coffee container, to have in my kitchen to put my items in, so that I'm not running out to the compost pile with just one or two things. So, you know, banana peels and lettuce and cabbage and grapevines and potato peels and tomato peels and any kind of leftover food. You don't want to put dairy, meats, or a lot of fat and oils in your compost. But another thing that you can use that it took me a while to think of was dryer lint, or the dirt out of your vacuum cleaner bag. You can put that into your backyard compost. And we all have those, don't we? Now, another green that you would think would be a brown is coffee grounds. Coffee grounds are a green material, and a lot of people now are using these Keurigs. Well, if you take the top off of the Keurig pod, then inside is a little filter. You dump the coffee grounds, and in here is a little filter that you can pull out and put into your compost. It's a little cool out here. My fingers aren't wanting to work with me. But there we go. So just pull that filter out. And you may be able to recycle the plastic pod depending on what can and cannot be recycled in your area. Now, to save waste, if you cannot recycle those pods, you can use these reusable pods and put your own coffee in them. I use these, and I have several of them, and I'll sit down and fill them up, and that way I have coffee for a week or two, and then when they're empty, I fill them up again. And that way you don't have the filter or the pod that you have to worry about doing anything with, and you can compost the coffee grounds. And that is a green material. Another brown would be paper bags, or newspaper. Okay. And some other green materials would be weeds. Now, if your weeds have already gone to seed, then you may want to put the seed head in a black garbage bag and put it out in the really hot sun for a few days to kill those seeds. But, you can put straw. Straw is a brown, and other natural fibers. Now, a t-shirt made out of 100% cotton is a natural fiber. Cotton was grown in the dirt, and so if it was grown in the dirt, it'll turn back into dirt. So you could compost an old t-shirt. Now, again, you can, try to go by one thing I meant to tell you though, with coffee grounds, say you don't drink a lot of coffee. Well, I've heard that, and I don't know about the local Starbucks, but Starbucks is supposed to have their used coffee grounds bagged up in the store that you can come and get for free. So if you need a green material, especially during the winter when a lot of our grass and stuff isn't green, that may be an option. But I haven't had a chance to check that out yet. So, again, browns to greens, use nature's ratio. Pile it up, put it in, give it a try. Because if you don't get started, then you'll never know. The most important part is just to get started. Start putting the items in the bin. Okay, so we said that the more surface area, the faster it will decompose. I mean, you can put your items in a blender and blend it up. Eggshells, you can grind to a powder and put in your compost. You can put human hair, in your compost. It's a protein. And stale or flat sugary soda. The soda is a good source or it actually feeds good and bad bacteria. So that is also an option. Now, one thing that I was surprised about, and you have to be really careful about this, and it's kind of just maybe a little humorous item, you can put urine in your backyard compost. So, say, if you have little boys running around, or sometimes even big boys that like to go outside, just have them water your compost. Now, if they're taking a lot of medications, then you might not want to encourage that, but, otherwise, it provides nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to your compost bin. Okay, so now we talked about surface area, making it small. Now you can also turn it or aerate it, and this keeps the air flowing. Remember, for something to decompose, you need sunlight, air, and water. So the air keeps everything moving, and what makes the compost is the microorganisms, the millipedes, the centipedes, and the other little bugs that eat on the materials you put in. That's why tearing it up into little shreds helps increase the speed of your compost, because it gives those bugs more space to eat, and it makes it easier for them to digest, and it helps get that heat up in your compost pile so it will decompose more quickly. Now, a really good compost pile it's good to be anywhere from 80 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the optimal or the best temperature is around 120 to 130. So, and remember that stick that we put down in the middle? That is for helping to aerate your compost. Just grab that stick and, shake it and move it around and get the air flowing into your compost. Now, another thing, the earth machine has a front door. So once you can get in there with this broom handle or a shovel or a rake or a hoe and just, jostle it around and move everything and get it all mixed up. You don't really have to do it right after you put it in there, because then all the little things that you just put in hasn't had a chance to decompose yet, so it wants to come out the door. All right, so another thing that you can do is water your compost. You want it to be about the consistency of a well wrung out dish rag. So in the summer, when you're watering your flower and your vegetable gardens, water your compost. Now, if you reach in and grab a handful and squeeze it and water drips out, then your compost is probably a little bit too wet. But again, compost happens, so it's not a big deal, but it will, it likes to be, again, just like a damp dish rag is the optimal. If you do that, so if it's dry, water it. If it's wet, leave it alone. Maybe take the lid off and let the sun beam down on it to dry it out a little. And then, what do you do? How do you know if you're getting the right mix of browns to greens? Well, if your compost pile has an acidy smell, then you have too many greens and you need to add some browns or some carbon. If it's a mildewy type smell, then you want to add some greens. So the best way to judge your pile is by sight, by smell, by feel. Just know your compost. And again, you have to get started. So now, how do you know if your compost is finished? Well, you look at it. If the dirt, it'll have a sweet smell, and all of the items, the banana peels, the leaves, the vegetable scraps, won't look like vegetable scraps anymore. It'll all just look like dark, rich dirt. And that's when you know that it's ready to use on your compost. Another thing that you can do is build a screen. And that way you can put your finished compost in and screen it and get the chunks out. And that's none of this is, mandatory. Again, compost happens. It will turn into dirt eventually if you just pile it up and leave it alone. But again, if you want compost in as little as 6 weeks to 6 months, then the more things you do, the faster you will have compost. So, how do you get an earth machine? If you live in Tullahoma, you can go to Tullahoma Public Works and tell them that you would like to start composting, and they will hook you up with a backyard composter. Interlocal Solid Waste Authority purchases these, and Tullahoma purchases some also, and we also received some with a grant. Now, if you live in Franklin, Lincoln, Moore, or Bedford, then send me an email or check out our website. My email is carolfulmer@bellsouth.net or carol@iswarecycle.net, and our website is www.iswarecycle.net. So again, don't waste your resources. Use them to make good, rich dirt that you can use around your home, in your gardens, just in your yard to enrich your soil. But it all starts with you. You have to get started. Thank you.